Now, the Prime Ministers of India and Pakistan could cross paths with each other at the UN headquarters in New York today. As the UN General Assembly session gets underway in New York, at least one occasion could present itself when Modi and Khan would be under the same roof, an eagerly awaited optic amid Imran Khan trying to draw global attention to Jammu and Kashmir, which India maintains is an internal issue. That said, while Modi and Khan may chance upon each other at various engagements slated for today, it is speculative at best to assume that the two leaders will confront each other at the United Nations. Modi and Khan would address the UN General Assembly on the 27th. All right, joining me in the studio is Ambassador Arun Singh, who needs no introduction. He's been India's envoy to the US, Israel and France. Ambassador Singh, good to have you back on Beyond World is One. A quick word from you about Trump's speech at the UNGA, and then set it up for the Trump-Modi meeting for our viewers.
Several things struck me in Trump's comments. He started by saying that now there is a divide between totalitarian systems and systems that are democracies. And I think people have been pointing out that the way US will frame the future competition between the United States and China and try and build partnerships and alliances around that is the divide between those who are doing well economically but are not democracies and those who are democracies. So, and then, as you mentioned, he went on to dwell extensively on China and talking about China's economic and trade practices that are contrary to international norms and rules. He also referred to Hong Kong and putting China on notice that if China takes any kind of a repressive measure in Hong Kong, perhaps the US would also lead to some kind of criticism. But he didn't make any reference to this issue of Uyghurs. And there's been a lot of reporting on some human rights violations in Xinjiang. But going beyond that, he reiterated many of the standard US positions that he has been articulating for the last 3 years. He said that the US is the most powerful country in the world. To try and address the doubts in people's minds whether the US is withdrawing from the international stage, he reiterated the need from his point of view, for countries to build on their national foundations. Now, this is contrary to the message that has come from the US since the Second World War.
He says the future belongs to the patriots, not globalists.
That's right. And because since the Second World War, the US has been sort of leading the world in the direction of globalization under a US and West-led system. And this was reinforced after 1990 when the Soviet Union dissolved. So, and President Clinton, Bush, Obama all pushed for that so that the US would set the rules under which nations interacted. Now, the US also had economic consequences from that, and therefore President Trump says he wants to go back. He reiterated the need for the partners to bear more of the share of expenses, spoke about reforming the international trade, and then, of course, he went on to speak about the challenges with Iran, what he's trying to do in Afghanistan. I think one interesting aspect was his reference to social media and trying to push that those who are running the social media companies should not be so forward-leading in terms of removing content from the social media. Because I think many of President Trump's followers, some of whose content that they're putting on the social media has not been found acceptable. So that's, again, I think, a controversial message that he put out there. So these are some of the important things. I think, again, from India's point of view, he did not make any reference to India, Pakistan, or the developments in Kashmir. So if he had, that could have been awkward, and I'm sure Pakistan would be under tremendous distress that there was no such reference. Even though in his meeting yesterday with the Pakistan Prime Minister, as you indicate, he did refer that he was ready to mediate if both asked, but that is a standard US position.
Now, talking about India, Ambassador Singh, now we are less than 1 hour away from that much anticipated Trump-Modi bilateral on the margins of the UN General Assembly. What should one expect to happen when the talks conclude in terms of bilateral, regional and global issues of particular interest to both countries?
So it's interesting that they have both decided to meet again in New York.
And this is the fourth meeting in as many months.
That's right, because they met in Osaka at the time of the G20 in June. They met again in Paris at the time of the G7 in August. They had extensive time spent together on September 22nd in Houston, and they decided to meet again. So I think, one, this reflects comfort they have in their personal interactions, the value they attach to the relationship, and clearly they are hoping to get some outcome on the bilateral level. And
would trade top the agenda?
Well, that's what's coming out in the reports. And the fact that our Commerce Minister has gone to New York and had a meeting with the U.S. trade representative would again indicate that effort is being made in the direction of ironing out some of the differences on trade, so that if some kind of a limited agreement or understanding can be worked out, if that is done, it will be very significant. Because in otherwise, what is a very positive relationship in terms of defense cooperation, political cooperation, convergence in the framework of the Indo-Pacific, trade has been an element of friction and bringing in some negativity in the relationship. So if you are able to iron that out, and then especially in the context of the Indian government coming out and announcing major plans and desires for attracting foreign investment in India. And recently the government announced reduction in corporate taxes. So if the trade friction with the US is lowered, that process will also
There
be
will be some reportage about a big bang announcement from either or both Trump and Modi. What should we actually expect to happen when the meeting concludes? I mean, should we expect any trade agreement or some other agreement by the two leaders?
Well, if some sort of a limited agreement is worked out on trade, on some items, that will be a very big step. Because it will send a positive signal. And also, if as a result of that, the GSP benefits on exports from India are again started, then that will help a lot of industries that are labor intensive in nature, in textile, in gems and jewelry, in leather. So that again would be a positive development. And I'm sure they'll discuss some of the major challenges at the United Nations, including on the subject of terrorism.
Sure. Ambassador Singh, to hold your thoughts, I want to go back one more time to Trump's speech at the UNGA. Now, Trump took China head-on in his address to the United Nations General Assembly just a short while ago. Trump said that Chinese firms have stolen American technology and that he is not willing to accept bad deals. Trump views geopolitics through the prism of trade. His decisions are influenced by trade deficits and tariffs. His politics is governed by his America First policy. So his address at the UNGA was no different. Trump's address had all this and more: China, trade deal, Iran, and illegal immigrants. So if I can go back to my guest, Ambassador Singh, in the studio. Ambassador Singh, if you were to go back to the Trump speech at the UNGA, any areas of concern in particular, given the fact that the U.S. has had a rather tumultuous relationship with Iran, with China trade deal, especially Indo-Pacific region, given the fact that for the first time ever, the Quad, the India, US, Japan, Australia meeting will take place on the margins of the United Nations in New York at the foreign minister level. So your thoughts on what India should expect based on what Trump said in that speech there?
So I think there's nothing specific that would cause concern to India. But I think what it signals that we are dealing with a different United States. And talking in terms of countries working on the basis of national foundations, promoting their own culture, decrying globalization.
But is it good for India if a US president looks inward? I mean, he's isolationist, he's protectionist, so would that augur well for India going forward?
We will have to see, because when the US took a globalizing approach, then special privileges were given to developing countries. Now, India is a developing country, although at one level we are doing very well, but there are still large numbers in India living in poverty, and therefore some special dispensation is required. And you'd have noted that in his comments, President Trump did refer to the fact that developing countries are getting special privileges, and although he was more specifically targeting China, but otherwise he has at other times made that reference. So I think the signal that is coming out that we are now dealing with a different United States, and even if President Trump is not there, the politics that he has now brought to the fore, it may be difficult for others to very easily walk back from that.
All right, I'll come back to Ambassador Singh momentarily, but it's a WION World is one exclusive from New York. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's ambitious target to achieve a $5 trillion economy by 2024 is feasible with the right reforms, says Arvind Panagaria, former vice chairman of Niti Aayog. Speaking to WION World is One's Palki Sharma Upadhyay at the WION Global Summit at Columbia University. Panagaria lauded the government on the recent corporate tax cuts. The noted economist also says that trade dispute between the US and China offers a huge window of opportunity for India. Is a slice of that conversation.